Within this video, you will learn the differences between a coupled, a decoupled, a hybrid, and a headless CMS architecture. Now, understanding these differences is going to allow you to make a better, more informed decision the next time you need to pick a CMS to power one of your projects. So historically, a CMS only really had to support a website. However, nowadays we've got websites, mobile apps, Internet of Things, the list goes on and on. Now, because a CMS has to support so many different things, if you go online and do some research, you can literally find hundreds of different types of CMS systems that you can pick from. So understanding the architectures, the pros and cons of each, and understanding which CMS systems reign supreme in each category is going to allow you to cut that list down and allow you to pick a CMS that's going to work for your development team, your content team. And more importantly, picking the right CMS is basically going to make you an absolute legend at work. And I've heard that picking the right CMS system will basically mean that you'll get promoted, you'll become the CEO of your company, you'll become a millionaire, and you're going to be living in Hawaii, living it up. So, if this all sounds good to you, this is going to be an epic video. Now, if this type of content floats your boat and you haven't come across one of my videos before, my name is John and I do weekly YouTube videos on stuff that basically helps developers become the best that they can be. So before moving on, there's two things that pretty much every single YouTuber asks. First, smash on the subscribe button. Second, clicking on the like. Doing those things basically means you'll see my content and it helps my channel grow. It takes me ages to do these videos, so I'd appreciate it. And as a little reward, I'm going to show you a picture of a dolphin. Now, with that said and done, let's get on and have a look at what a coupled CMS architecture entails. Back when CMS systems first became popular in the 90s and early noughties, content was only really delivered to a website. So this means that all the original CMS systems were built in a very specific way, which is now known as a coupled CMS architecture. So even though we're in 2022, there are hundreds of CMS systems out there which still support coupled CMS architectures. And just because it's the original architecture doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider it for your project. Now, in a coupled CMS architecture, we have our CMS, and we also have the front-end HTML and templates. Now, within a coupled CMS architecture, what happens is the CMS vendor will provide a framework, some help utilities, code, whatever you want to call it, that allows a developer to query the CMS in order to get content from the CMS and the database. Now, the API that the CMS will provide will typically be written in the same language that was used to build the CMS. So WordPress is one of the original CMS systems on the marketplace. WordPress is written in PHP. WordPress provides PHP helpers, API utility classes that allows a developer to create a template, use those PHP libraries in order to query the HTML. Now, when it comes to deploying our coupled CMS system, we have all of our CMS code and we have all of our HTML code within a single folder. So in theory, this can make deployments a lot easier. One really important thing in consideration when you're picking a coupled CMS is the programming language. Because the API is going to be written in the same language that the CMS is written, you're going to need to have people on your team that knows that language. So if you know PHP, you're probably going to like something like a Drupal or a WordPress. So the programming language that's being used to power the CMS is key when you're thinking about a coupled CMS. We now know what's entailed in a coupled architecture. Let's look at some of the pros and cons of using it. Now, first off, pro of using it is development skills. If you're a developer or you have a developer at work, then if they know a certain language like PHP, C#, whatever it may be, creating a CMS in a language that you know is going to make life much easier. There's going to be less upskilling. Now, in today's job market, it is very, very difficult to hire new people, especially with new skills. So making use of the development resource you have is a great reason for using a coupled CMS. Now, next up, we're going to talk about deployments. Because our CMS code and our website code is all in the same folder, in many instances, to deploy that code, it's just a case of firing up an FTP client, having a connection to a server, copying everything across in a single go. Job is a good. And because we're just copying everything into a single server, our infrastructure costs might be a little bit less because, we're only paying for one thing rather than potentially multiple. Now, the last benefit, and a lot of people rave on about this, is preview. Because a coupled CMS only supports websites, the preview is very easy. So most CMS vendors will provide some sort of framework and they'll have inline preview. They'll have preview capabilities, so everything looks amazing and content editors can see how their changes are working in real time. Now, if you're looking or talking about a headless CMS that support a website, a mobile app, a smartwatch, being able to see your content in all those different devices isn't really as easy because it's a much harder problem. So preview is definitely where a coupled CMS can shine. Now, obviously, things aren't all rainbows and unicorns when it comes to coupled CMS. There are a few downsides. Now, the first one is it's website only. So if you're considering something like a mobile app, smartwatch, you need your content to be shared everywhere, you're going to need to pick a CMS that supports a REST API or some sort of GraphQL that exposes their content. Simple as. Now, the next issue with a coupled CMS is responsibility. In a coupled CMS, you'll be responsible for downloading it and installing it. You'll also be responsible for keeping it up to date. So a CMS vendor will typically release patches, security updates, maybe once a month, every couple of weeks, and it'll be up to you or your team to download these patches, apply them, test them, and then push them in production. And this can take, say, a month's worth of development effort every year. So it's a big responsibility to keep up to date with CMS. Now, things get even worse when a CMS vendor releases a big bang, like a big major version. So if we're going from version 1 to 2, what will often happen is the CMS vendor will completely change how things work under the hood. So maybe their framework to talk to the CMS changes, maybe the database technology changes, maybe the web server changes. The outcome is that when you need to upgrade from, say, version 1 to version 2, your website completely breaks. And in a lot of instances, you'll have to completely rewrite a majority of that code just to get your website working again. Completely having to rewrite your website every 2 or 3 years whenever a CMS vendor upgrades is just a massive time and energy drain. So for instance, there's a CMS out there called Sitecore CMS. It is renowned for hard upgrades. A typical Sitecore CMS upgrade can be somewhere between 3 and maybe 6 or 9 months worth of effort. Now, the final issue I have with a coupled CMS is around code. So in order to render a page in a coupled CMS, a request comes in, some code is run, the web page is generated, and that HTML is then sent back to the browser. Now, let's say you accidentally make a code change in the menu, or maybe the CMS updates, which then breaks the menu. What happens now is that when a page request comes in, the menu's broken, the page can't get rendered correctly, and a 404, an error page, gets displayed to the end user. Now, if you have made a mistake on a menu, every single page on your website can suddenly break, and then your website is completely down. Now, the other issue, because we need to rely on code, is that the server can only handle X amount of web requests. So if you've ever tried to buy a ticket from something like a Ticketmaster, we'll know that, when your favorite gig is coming out, the website can grind to a halt because there's only so much processing that server can do. Now, if you look at some of the other website architectures where we get our pages and we convert them into static HTML, we don't have to deal with that problem anymore. So we don't need to worry about code changes suddenly breaking our website in production. We don't need to worry about scaling because we can start using things like a CDN or edge nodes to be able to put our content into the cloud and make sure everything works quickly. To finish this discussion, let's quickly go over some examples of some coupled CMS systems. So first off, we have the one that everyone knows, which is WordPress, used by over 70% of the world's websites. Based in PHP, it's a bit older now compared to how it used to be. It is still very popular. Next up, we have Drupal. Drupal is another PHP-based original. We also have Joomla. Joomla is another PHP-based original. Now, if PHP isn't your thing, and that's not a bad decision, if you want to use something like C#, use the .NET Core framework, then A great choice if you have limited money is Umbraco CMS. So Umbraco is free, open source. If you're more enterprise and you have a big organization, then you might want to consider Optimizely CMS, formerly known as Episerver, because they are a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. If you also want to consider enterprise level .NET, you might want to consider Sitecore CMS. However, they are not as popular as they used to be. And if you just want to do enterprise with lots and lots of money and you know Java, then the Adobe Experience Manager could be the CMS for you. The next architecture we're going to review is the newer one on the block, and it's Headless CMS. So Headless CMS, its whole purpose in life is to support content on multiple channels. So if you've got a website, a mobile app, whatever it might be, the CMS is going to have something like a REST API, a GraphQL endpoint, and all your different devices can talk back to your CMS, get access to your content, and do what they need with it. Now, in terms of Headless CMS, it's going to be a CMS system exposed with an API. Now, one of the challenges with a Headless CMS is that in each one of your heads, you're going to be responsible for talking to that API and then writing all the code for that website to work. So when we looked at a coupled CMS, something like a WordPress is going to give you all the framework to quickly and easily run a website. When it comes to Headless, in a lot of instances, you're going to be completely responsible for building everything yourself. I said most of the times, not always. Now, when it comes to the Headless architecture, you'll have probably two considerations. Would you like to host that Headless CMS yourself? Obviously, doing that is going to have the same issues of patches, upgrades, that kind of stuff. Or you can use something like a SaaS CMS. So SaaS, software as a service, you pay a CMS vendor, you'll go online, create an account, you won't have to install anything, you won't have to patch anything, you won't have to apply any upgrades, so life's much easier. In a majority of cases as well, a Headless CMS won't require a developer to configure the CMS. So anyone non-technical will be able to log into the portal. They can start doing the content modeling of creating home pages and landing pages or call to action blocks. They can publish those changes. They can add content. And we can do all of that just within the CMS portal without having to know any type of programming language work whatsoever. When it comes to having a conversation around Headless, you're quickly going to start bumping into random acronyms like Mac Alliance, the Jam Stack, server-side rendered, static site generation, SSR, SSO. There's a load of buzzwords that you need to get your head around. And basically, we have all these different acronyms because in a Headless CMS architecture, we have two main ways of rendering our pages from our CMS system. Now, the one which is getting a lot of traction is called Jamstack. And Jamstack has loads of different benefits. So in the Jamstack, we have our Headless CMS. Now, one of the differences within a Jamstack website is that all of our pages will get converted into static HTML. So this means that they're much quicker. It means that the server can handle more requests. So with a Headless CMS, we basically update our content, click publish. What happens is that under the hood, some server stuff gets triggered off using a webhook. All the pages get converted into static HTML. Static HTML gets delivered into your CDN layer, and then people can access it. Now, when it comes to Headless, this isn't the only way that you can architect your website. The other way is also more traditional, like a coupled CMS. So we can have our Headless CMS, we can deploy that to a server, people can then access our server. In order to make sure that those pages get rendered by Google, we have to do something like server-side rendering. So we basically have to give a version to Google to make sure it gets cached. And in essence, we have two completely different ways of serving up our pages. So when you go Headless, you need to make this decision of, am I going to use Jamstack or I'm going to use a more traditional architecture? When it comes to picking a Headless CMS, you have hundreds of options. So if you go over to jamstackers.org, go to the Headless CMS page, you will find something like 200 different CMS systems you can pick from. Now, I've been building Headless CMS systems for about 4 or 5 years, and the ones that I recommend are Contentful. So at the moment, I believe Contentful is the most popular CMS. It has the most features. It's great for development. It's free for a certain level. Now, if you want to go big, on the other hand, say you work at an IKEA or maybe a Starbucks and you're enterprise level, the CMS that I recommend you check out first is Content Stack. Content Stack is aimed at the organization. It is not cheap. However, it's there to handle the big use cases. Now, a personal favorite of mine is Storyblock. Storyblock's really cool because it allows you to have inline previewing capabilities, and it is one of the only headless CMS systems that you can see what's going on. They also have for a composable plugin architecture, so you're free to customize the CMS. Now, if you're really dead keen on self-hosting the CMS for you, a great option for you would be Shappy. Shappy, open source, 100% free. You can then install it on a server yourself, get it all up and running, life will be grand. Obviously, there's loads of buzz around headless CMS, but just like any single architecture, it's not going to be the best for every single use case and situation out there. Now, if I'm honest, nowadays, when it comes to building a website, I'll typically go for a headless CMS and then afterwards qualify that out if I bump into a use case where it's not really that great. So let's consider when and when we shouldn't use headless. First off, if you need content which is going to be consumed by multiple devices, website, mobile, then headless is an essential. You're going to need some sort of REST API to get that content, and the saving and content editing is going to be worth it. Now, for me personally, in terms of website development, being able to use Jamstack as an architecture has loads of benefits. Now, Jamstack definitely isn't correct for every single website out there. Now, if you've got a more traditional website where you publish your pages and they change very infrequently, you should be using Jamstack. However, if you've got something like an e-commerce website where your product pricing changes every couple of minutes, or maybe you're in a news site where all your content's constantly changing, Jamstack can create more complications than it solves. Now, the other nice thing around headless is that you can go SaaS. So most of the new headless CMS vendors, they're all SaaS. This means you can log into their portal, you can start creating content, doing the content modeling without having to do any development work. Also means you don't need to worry about patching anything, you don't need to do any of the infrastructure stuff, do any of the support. That's really nice. And another nice thing about headless is that they all play nicely with JavaScript. So this can be a benefit in terms of recruitment. Obviously, JavaScript right now, most popular framework, you want to hire new developers who want to work with the newest tech. So working with headless is going to probably make it easier for recruitment. Now, there's definitely situations where I wouldn't use headless. And if I'm honest, when it comes to picking if I can use SaaS or self-hosting, if the option is to self-host, then when it comes to a coupled CMS or self-hosted CMS, so SaaS is going to give you way more options. And one of the deciding factors I found that if you go SaaS or self-host is data. So if you're a finance company or you need your data in-house and you have to go self-hosting, then your options in headless are going to be restricted. You still have some great options. However, at this point, you might want to consider some of the alternatives. If your content editors just love preview and it's be all and end all, then you might want to consider a coupled CMS just so you can get that inline preview capabilities for your website and then maybe have two different systems. I don't think this is a big deal, but a number of people complain about this and it's very annoying. Now, another major bugbear with headless is it will take a lot of developer input. So remember in a coupled CMS where the CMS vendor will give you the framework to build everything, in headless, in a lot of instances, your development team completely integrate with the CMS and make sure that your website or your mobile app works. So they'll be responsible for making sure that the preview works, the correct tokens get passed, correct headers get applied. Now, what this means is that say you want to change some of the capabilities on your website and your mobile app, it will be completely left to a developer to do a load of coding work before you can see that change. And this can actually really slow things down. And out of all the things where I've heard people moan about sort of headless CMS, having to rely on developer input all the time is probably the biggest one. The next architecture is called Hybrid. And Hybrid is basically a coupled CMS architecture and a headless CMS architecture, and they're kind of mixed together in a perfect love child, or not. So as we can see on my amazing diagram, in terms of website development, we're still going to have our front-end templates. They're going to still be deployed with our CMS. And this is going to allow us to create a coupled CMS exactly how we've always built it. So we're going to be using something like a PHP, C#, Java, whatsoever to build all of our front-end website out. Now, additionally, aside from just having our front-end templates and our coupled CMS, we're also going to have some sort of content delivery API where we can expose all of the content within the CMS via an API. So in this way, we can do our mobile apps, Internet of Things. We can do everything via REST API, GraphQL. You might be looking at the hybrid CMS and wondering, why in the heck would anyone use it? So let's think about some of the pros and cons. Now, from my experience, when companies tend to talk about hybrid CMS, it's usually because they've got some legacy historic websites that they don't know what to do with. Now, obviously, coupled CMS vendors, they're not silly billies. They don't want to lose customers. So if you look at any of the large scale CMS vendors that have been around for ages, all of them started off as coupled. However, they all released some sort of content delivery API or content over service, or be named something like that, which allows content to be exposed via some sort of REST API GraphQL. So this means that if you've got a website which has been built in something like an Adobe Experience Manager, Sitecore, Optimizely CMS, if you just want to create some content and get that exposed into a mobile app, instead of having to completely re-platform, what we could do is just enable a feature in our website, expose some content via API, and get on with it. And obviously, the benefit of this means that we don't have any migration. We don't have to completely rebuild our website. We can enable a feature and get up and running pretty quickly using the same infrastructure. Now, the great thing about this is obviously going out to tender, doing an RFP process, doing a load of research. It's boring, it takes ages. If you've ever had to fill in a security questionnaire around CMS, you won't know what I'm talking about. Now, the other benefit of just using what you already have is the team has less to learn. They won't need to learn how to rebuild their website. The trade-off for building everything inside a single CMS is going to be complexity. Now, your website is still going to be using all the traditional coupled CMS APIs and code and ways of working. You're also going to have a website or another app using a completely different way of working. This means that in a hybrid CMS, we're going to have multiple different ways of doing the same thing, and it can get complicated to either keep that code updated or to know which is the best way of doing things. Another consideration in classic old hybrid CMS is content. So the way that we actually add content within a coupled CMS and a headless CMS differ, and the process is fundamentally different. So in a coupled CMS, because we're mainly talking websites, the way that we add content is in a page structure. So at the top of our page tree, we have a home page. Underneath that, we might have landing pages, content pages, whatever floats your boat. Now, a typical challenge in a coupled CMS is where do you put your site's global setting? Because we only have a page tree, typically in every single CMS, you have to manage those settings somewhere within that page tree. Now, this is fundamentally different compared to when we're adding content in a headless CMS. So in content CMS, we do something called content modeling, where we look at all the data and all the content that we need to export when it needs to get ingested from all of our different websites, mobile apps, whatever. Then we have to model all those different types of data into objects. So in a headless CMS, you might have a page object, you might have a person object, you might have a quote objects, call to action objects, button objects, header objects, you name it, you're going to basically be creating objects. Now, because hybrid CMS has basically come from a coupled CMS, the issue is that you'll be adding your content using that page tree structure. So even though you might have some content which doesn't really live in a page tree, you're still going to have to manage all of that content like you would the global settings into that page tree somewhere. And this might mean that your CMS structure isn't as optimal as it could be, might get a bit messy, could be hard to find things, and it might not be as nice and clean as it would be if you just created all that content inside of a headless CMS in the first place. Now, the other downside of having everything in one massive monolith is publishing and issues. If you do some sort of code deployment to your CMS, and it breaks, you're literally going to break everything. So your website's going to go down, your mobile app's going to go down, everything's going to go down. Now let's think if we were using Jamstack and Headless, we don't have that project. Your CMS could go down, but your static HTML pages, they're going to work fine. So the more that you bung into one single thing, the higher the risk that everything goes down. Now, if you're wondering which CMSs support hybrid mode, let's go over a few of them. Pretty much as a spoiler, every single one of the major enterprise CMS systems, which have been around for a number of years, they all support this mode. So the leader in the DXP market, Adobe Experience Cloud, that supports hybrid. Optimizely CMS, formerly known as EpiServer, also supports hybrid. Bloomreach, which has been around for a while now, but it's one of the newer kids, hybrid. Sitecore, again been around for ages, hybrid. And finally, may surprise you, WordPress can also be configured in traditional mode and over API. WordPress can also be used as a hybrid CMS. So if you have a legacy CMS and you need to provide support for something like a mobile app, first thing you might want to do is just check if you can enable CMS's content over API ability, and that will save you from replatforming. The final type of architecture that we're going to cover is called decoupled. Now, personally, I am not a fan of decoupled. I've built two solutions in a decoupled way. I did not like the experience because it took me longer. I didn't find any good benefits from using it. So let's cover what's included in this decoupled system. So as you can see from my diagram, decoupled and coupled look pretty similar. We're going to deploy our CMS and our front-end HTML and templates all in the same folder, exactly the same as we do as a coupled CMS. Now, the difference between a coupled CMS and a decoupled CMS is basically this extra API layer in the middle. Now, remember in the coupled CMS, CMS and our front-end HTML templates would be very closely coupled together, and they'll be using the CMS APIs in order to render content in our templates. Now, in a decoupled system, we have a CMS. That CMS will then expose all its content via an API, and then in our website, we'll access all of those contents versus a REST API GraphQL layer. Now, the supposed benefit of going like this is that it allows you to update your CMS or your front-end HTML templates easier. However, in reality, I've never seen this ever happen before. What typically happens is that when a CMS vendor makes an update, might be a minor or a major, what tends to happen is this API layer tends to change because something in the CMS is massively broken. So this means that you end up having to write a lot of your front-end HTML and templates again every single time you update your CMS. Again, the other nice thing is you might go, actually, I'm going to completely re-platform and how my front-end website looks like. However, whenever anyone goes over this kind of look and feel change, under the hood, the content's typically going to change as well. So what this means is that your API is going to change and your CMS structure is going to change. So again, it's generally quicker to rebuild everything from scratch rather than trying to get this to work and shoehorn it within this structure. But this is the supposed benefits of this decoupled solution, is that you're meant to be able to update the CMS and upgrade the CMS without impacting the front-end HTML template. And again, you're meant to be able to update the front-end HTML without needing to upgrade or release the CMS. I have never seen any of these benefits in action. If you have, let me know in the comments. From my experience, a decoupled CMS basically just adds in a lot more complexity compared to just using a coupled CMS in the first place or using a headless CMS. Because I so dislike the decoupled architecture, I don't really have any positives to say about it. The idea behind decoupled is that it's meant to give you a little bit more flexibility compared to a coupled architecture. However, in reality, I've yet to see any of these benefits, and if anything, it's just made my development career longer and more painful. Now, this basically sums up the 4 different ways that you can build websites using a CMS system. So hopefully by now you'll get the differences between coupled, headless, decoupled, and hybrid. Now, what are your thoughts? I'd be really interested to know what your favorite type of architecture is, if this video has made sense, if you agree with me, if you have a favorite CMS you think I've left below. Leave a comment below. I do read all of them and I'd greatly appreciate it. Now, it's come to that stage in the video that I have to peddle my wares. So as I said at the beginning, if you do those two little things of clicking on the subscribe button and clicking on the like button, that will help me grow my channel, also mean that you won't lose out on my content, and I would greatly appreciate it. Now, I also do a weekly newsletter every Sunday called the Sunday Sessions. The link to it is below, managed by a third party. So if you subscribe, no problems whatsoever. However, there's some good stuff in there and I recommend you check it out. Otherwise, I hope you're having a great day wherever you're in the world. And until next time, happy coding.